Mike Mangini wasn't just another drummer. He was stepping into the shoes of one of prog rock's most beloved bands, Dream Theater. When he got the call to work with John Petrucci, it felt like the opportunity of a lifetime. But at the same time, he knew the expectations would be sky high. Petrucci wasn't just a guitarist. He was a perfectionist, a visionary who pushed every note to the limit. For Mangini, it was exciting but terrifying. He had to prove not only his skills, but also his ability to fit into a band with a deep history. From the first day, the pressure was there. Every beat mattered, every fill carried weight, and every mistake felt magnified. Behind the scenes, Mangini knew what fans were thinking. Can he replace Mike Portnoy? Petrucci never directly said it, but Mangini felt it in the air. He wasn't just playing drums, he was carrying the weight of Dream Theater's legacy. The sessions weren't about showing off chops. They were about chemistry, discipline, and matching Petrucci's impossible standards. Mangini later admitted that at times he doubted himself. Every take felt like a test, every track like a final exam. The question wasn't whether he could play, it was whether he could become part of Dream Theater's heartbeat. Recording with John Petrucci was unlike anything Mangini had faced. Petrucci demanded absolute precision. A millisecond late or early, and the part had to be redone. For Mangini, it felt like walking on a tightrope. He respected Petrucci's vision, but it was mentally exhausting. The guitarist had an ear that caught every tiny detail, and Mangini sometimes wondered if he'd ever meet those standards. Still, Petrucci wasn't cruel. He pushed because he believed in the music. Mangini began to realize that this was less about impressing Petrucci and more about discovering his own limits as a musician. Unlike other drummers he had worked with, Petrucci wasn't loud with his criticism. He was quiet, calculated, and exact. That silence carried weight. When Petrucci paused after a take, Mangini's heart would race. Was it good enough, or was it back to square one? Sometimes the silence was worse than words. Mangini confessed that it felt like a constant inner battle. He had to trust himself, even when he couldn't read Petrucci's expression. The quiet pressure was as intense as the music itself, a reminder that every stroke of the drumstick had to count. At one stage, Mangini admitted that he hit a breaking point. The endless takes, the constant scrutiny, and the thought of disappointing Petrucci weighed heavily on him. He began to question if he belonged there at all. Nights went sleepless, his mind replaying every mistake he thought he made. But then he reminded himself why he was there, because he had earned it. He wasn't a rookie. He was one of the best drummers alive. That thought gave him the strength to face another session, no matter how brutal it was. What fans didn't always see was that behind Petrucci's high standards was a mentor. When Mangini delivered something powerful, Petrucci made sure to let him know. Those small nods of approval, a quiet, "That's the one," meant everything. Mangini realized that Petrucci wasn't trying to break him down, he was trying to bring out the very best. In those rare moments of praise, Mangini felt the pressure lift. It wasn't just about playing for Petrucci, it was about playing with him, as part of something bigger than both of them. Slowly, Mangini began to adapt. He stopped thinking about replacing Portnoy and started thinking about being himself. Petrucci's pressure became less of a burden and more of a challenge. Each song turned into a journey of discovery. How far could he push his timing, his creativity, his power? By the time tracks started coming together, Mangini wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The drummer who once feared the silence now understood it. It was Petrucci's way of demanding greatness. Even after recording, Mangini felt the weight of fan judgment. Every drum part would be compared, every groove dissected. Petrucci told him to focus on the music, not the noise outside. But that was easier said than done. For Mangini, it was another kind of pressure, living up to not just Petrucci's vision, but the fans' loyalty. Over time, though, he learned to trust in what they had created. The music spoke louder than any criticism, and Mangini realized he didn't need to prove himself to anyone except the band. When the final recordings were done, Mangini finally breathed. Listening back, he could hear not just drums, but the journey he had taken. Every struggle, every sleepless night, every silent pause from Petrucci, it was all worth it. He had made it. Not only had he survived the sessions, but he had also left his mark on Dream Theater's sound. Mangini opened up later, saying that those moments shaped him as a musician and as a person. He came in under pressure, but left with pride. Looking back, Mangini doesn't see the recording sessions as torture, but as transformation. Yes, the pressure was real, and yes, Petrucci demanded the impossible. But it forced him to reach a level he never thought he could. Today Mangini talks about those days not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because without that pressure, he might never have discovered the depth of his own talent. In the end, the sessions weren't just about recording an album, they were about proving that even under the heaviest weight, music can bring out the best in those who dare to face it. For Mangini, working with Petrucci wasn't just about music, it was about learning a new language. Petrucci spoke in riffs, phrases, and subtle nods. At first, Mangini struggled to understand what those little gestures meant, but over time, he started to pick up the cues. A raised eyebrow meant speed. A subtle smile meant groove. Silence meant try again. It wasn't written down. It was a bond built in the studio. Mangini realized that once he tuned into Petrucci's rhythm, the sessions became less like tests and more like conversations. Music became their shared language, and through it, Mangini found trust. Every time Mangini sat behind the kit, he felt the invisible weight of Dream Theater's history pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just another band. This was a group that had influenced an entire generation of musicians. He wasn't recording for himself, or even just for Petrucci. He was recording for millions of fans who expected perfection. That thought could have crushed him, but instead, Mangini used it as fuel. If Dream Theater's legacy was heavy, then his drumming would have to be strong enough to carry it. Each beat became his way of honoring the past while carving out his own place in the band's future. In every story of struggle, there's a turning point. For Mangini, it came during one late-night session when exhaustion was written all over his face. Petrucci pushed for one more take. Mangini dug deep, let go of his fears, and played with raw instinct. When the final note rang out, there was silence. Then Petrucci smiled and said, "That's it." That was the breakthrough. In that moment, Mangini realized that Petrucci's pressure wasn't about breaking him down. It was about unlocking the very best in him. It wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about believing himself. By the end of the recordings, the relationship between Petrucci and Mangini had changed. What began as a test of endurance became a bond of respect. They had pushed each other through fire and came out stronger. For Mangini, it wasn't just about surviving Petrucci's perfectionism. It was about becoming a brother in music. He later said that those sessions taught him more than any lesson in drumming ever could. Petrucci had demanded greatness, and Mangini had delivered. The pressure had turned into partnership, and together they had created something timeless.